Some 911 calls don't come from the living. At 3:17 a.m., a call came through the emergency line. Static heavy, nearly unintelligible, but one thing was clear. Someone was begging for help from a house that had been empty for 11 years. It was supposed to be a routine welfare check. That's what Officer Daniels told himself as he cruised through the fog-drenched backroads of rural Maine. The address pinged was a two-story colonial at the edge of a forest, boarded up, condemned, no utilities connected. Everyone in town knew it simply as the Matheson Place. But what made this call different was the voice. The dispatcher had played back the recording. At first, it sounded like interference or wind maybe. But beneath the static, a woman's voice could be heard crying, then whispering something that sent a cold current through the entire department. "It's in the walls. It won't let me leave." No one was listed as living at that address. No trespassers had been reported. And yet, the call came from a landline that had supposedly been disconnected in 2012. Officer Daniels parked just beyond the gravel driveway, headlights slicing through the mist. The front door was slightly ajar. He noted that instantly. The wood was rotting, warped, and covered in faded police tape from years ago, long since peeled away by rain and time. Inside, it smelled like old water and scorched wood. The air felt heavier than it should have. Daniels clicked on his flashlight and called out, "Police, is anyone inside?" No response, but something answered, faint creaking like footsteps upstairs. He moved cautiously, each step echoing through the hollow house. The living room was littered with broken furniture and what looked like an old baby carriage turned to the wall. When he stepped past it, he noticed the wallpaper, or rather, what was beneath it. Dozens of names, scratched into the plaster, some with dates beside them. They weren't written in any ink or marker. They were carved, jagged and uneven, as if done in panic. The most recent date? The day before. And right beneath it, Daniels. He hadn't been there before. That was impossible. He tried to radio dispatch, but the channel filled with static. That was the second thing that didn't make sense. His comms had worked just fine on the road. But now, inside the house, it was like he'd been cut off. He pressed forward, following the sound of crying. The noise was faint, female, and distressed. It seemed to come from every direction at once. First from the kitchen, then the hall, then directly behind him. When he turned, the room was empty, but the crying continued, now rising into a panicked wail that echoed and overlapped itself. That's when he noticed the phone. It was sitting on a small table in the hall, dusty and yellowed with age, yet the receiver was off the hook and humming. Daniels approached, cautiously lifted it, and heard breathing. Not mechanical, not distorted, human. Raspy, gasping. He asked again, "Who is this? Are you in danger?" The breathing stopped. Then a voice whispered, "He found me because I answered." The line went dead. Daniels dropped the receiver. His hands were trembling now. He pulled out his notepad, trying to steady himself, flipping back through his earlier reports. And that's when he noticed something else. The time. It was 3:17 a.m. Still. Not again. Still. His watch hadn't moved. Neither had the one on the wall. Even his patrol car's dash clock had frozen. Time, for whatever reason, had stopped. Panicking now, Daniels decided to clear the second floor and get out. He climbed the stairs 2 at a time. The crying had returned, but this time it was distant, fading. At the top of the landing was a narrow hallway with 3 doors. One slightly ajar, one fully shut, one open wide. He picked the middle one. Inside, the walls were covered with newspaper clippings. Local reports of disappearances. All of them over the past 30 years. Officers, responders, dispatchers, even a fireman. Each article had something in common. Each victim had been responding to phantom calls. He scanned the room and saw a cracked mirror leaning against the wall. It was tilted slightly, but what made Daniels freeze wasn't his reflection. It was the second figure standing just behind him in the glass. A tall shape. Dark. No features, just presence. He spun around. Nothing there. But the room was colder now. Much colder. He could see his breath. Then came the whisper, right beside his ear. "You shouldn't have come alone." He bolted from the room, rushed down the stairs, and pushed through the front door. But instead of the porch, he found another hallway. Same peeling wallpaper. Same baby carriage. Same names carved in the wall. He wasn't outside. He hadn't escaped. The house had folded him back in. This was a loop. Daniels tried again. Different door, different path. Even kicked through a boarded-up window. But every time he crossed the threshold, he was back at the entrance. The same entrance. The same moment. 3:17 a.m. That's when he noticed the photographs. Scattered on a mantel were dozens of Polaroids, dusty and discolored. Each one showed the same house. Different officers. Different uniforms. All standing outside. All smiling. But none of those officers ever returned to duty. And in each photo, standing in the upper window, was the dark figure. It wasn't part of the house. It was using it. The Matheson house wasn't haunted in the traditional sense. It was a trap, a spiritual Venus flytrap that used distress calls as bait. And once someone responded, they became part of the house's memory, absorbed into its loop, its illusion. The voices were echoes, past victims, unable to leave, repeating their final moments in hopes someone might finally hear them. But the cruelest part? There was no woman in need. There never was. The voice that called for help was just another recording, another lure. And the longer Daniel stayed, the more the house began to forget who he was and replace him with something else. His radio finally clicked. A new voice came through. Dispatch to Officer Daniels. We're getting a 911 ping from your location. Caller is female. States someone is trapped in the walls. It was happening again. Only now, he was the voice on the other end. When a police officer's radio goes silent, it's usually a technical glitch. But what if the silence is followed by a sound that no one can explain, something that isn't human and shouldn't exist on this frequency? It happened in late October, just outside a small mountain town in Washington. A deputy named Clark was working the night shift, a quiet route that snaked through dense forest roads and near abandoned neighborhoods. Locals called that stretch the Pines. Not because it had pines, most of the forest had been clear-cut years ago, but because something else had taken root there, something people didn't like to talk about. It started as a routine check. A 911 call came in, no voice on the other end, just an open line. Dispatch triangulated the call to a derelict cabin about 18 miles from town. The strange part? That property had been empty for years. Some officers said it was condemned. Others said it should have been burned down a long time ago. Still, protocol is protocol. Clark responded. Dashcam footage shows him heading out along Route 32, calm, radioing and updates every few miles. Then, around 12:43 a.m., his voice cuts off mid-sentence. No static, no background noise, just gone. At first, dispatch thought it was a signal drop. The terrain was rough, and these things happen. But then something odd occurred. Roughly 3 minutes after the last radio transmission, the channel erupted with screaming. But not Clark's. The screaming was wrong. It was high-pitched and layered, like multiple voices overlapping. Not panicked, not desperate, but rhythmic. Like chanting. Mixed with it were strange distortions, almost like reversed whispers playing under the shrieks. Audio analysts later reviewed the recording. One described it as a chorus of mechanical anguish. Another simply quit the case. Backup units were dispatched immediately. When they arrived at the location, just past the mile marker near the old cabin, Clark's cruiser was parked at an angle, engine still running, driver's door wide open. The cabin sat about 200 feet up the hill. Its windows were boarded. No sign of forced entry. No footprints in the muddy path. Just fog. Heavy, unnaturally cold fog that hadn't been there in weather reports that night. Clark was nowhere to be found. They canvassed the area for hours. Drones, dogs, heat sensors, nothing. It was like the earth swallowed him. But here's the part that still disturbs people at the station. Inside the cruiser, still transmitting to dispatch, was Clark's body cam, left on the passenger's seat as if placed deliberately. The footage is incomplete. It shows him stepping out of the vehicle and approaching the cabin with his flashlight. He circles the perimeter. The timestamp flickers, then skips. Then, for exactly 6 minutes and 31 seconds, the camera shows only pitch black, accompanied by a low-frequency hum. Some officers reported headaches just watching that segment. Others said they saw movement in the shadows, faces, figures, or eyes. Then, out of nowhere, a whisper, "I called you," followed by what sounded like a door creaking open and a wet dragging sound. That's where the footage ends. On the surface, it's a missing person case, unsolved officially. But there are details that suggest something more layered, something psychological, paranormal, or possibly something engineered. Let's talk about the call. The 911 audio was never released to the public, but insiders say the waveform pattern showed no signs of a standard phone connection. In fact, the signal resembled looped analog feedback, something consistent with old reel-to-reel playback, not modern phones. Even stranger, the frequency signature of the screaming that came later, it matched an emergency broadcast tone from the early 1980s, one that was never used in that region. It had been decommissioned decades ago. Some speculate that whatever Clark encountered wasn't human, but mimicking humanity, using forgotten sounds, dead frequencies, echoes of distress no longer meant to exist. Others suggest a more psychological angle, that Clark may have wandered into an area affected by infrasound, low-frequency vibrations known to cause paranoia, dread, and even hallucinations. But that doesn't explain the footage, or the voice, or the sheer number of seasoned officers who refuse to review the evidence a second time. There's also a recurring detail in local legends, the idea that the Pines calls you when it's ready, that those who answer don't return, not because they're taken, but because they become something else. An echo on a dead channel, a flicker in corrupted footage. 2 weeks after Clark's disappearance, another officer, Sergeant Denny, volunteered to revisit the area. He lasted 11 minutes. His report says he never even got out of the car. He said he felt watched from below, not above, like something in the earth was listening. Back at the station, radios began malfunctioning when tuned to Channel 4, the same channel Clark had used that night. Dispatchers reported hearing whispers in the static, but only between 12:43 and 12:49 a.m., the exact time Clark went silent. The station eventually locked that channel entirely, citing equipment recalibration. But unofficially, they called it cursed. One retired officer claimed he dreamt of Clark standing outside the station gate every night for a week, always in full uniform, always motionless. When asked how he knew it was him, he simply said, because he still had the radio, and it was on. There's a theory floating around, shared mostly in whispers, never officially documented. It says some locations act like tuning forks, resonating at frequencies that amplify trauma, fear, or memory. They don't just trap people. They record them, absorb their final moments like magnetic tape, then replay them. Not to haunt, but to lure. According to this theory, Clark didn't disappear. Not exactly. He became part of the signal, a voice on the wire, a scream on the wrong frequency, a call waiting to be answered again. Officer Danny Laurie never believed in ghost stories. He was the kind of cop who thought most paranormal calls were just meth heads hallucinating or pranksters playing games. So when the station got a 911 call pinged to Grathmore County Jail, the dispatcher laughed and said, "Must be a glitch. Place has been empty since '93. But Danny didn't laugh, because the dispatcher didn't just hear static. She heard sobbing, and the voice was whispering, "It's watching me." They tried to trace the call again. Same result, the abandoned jail. Danny didn't believe in ghosts, but he did believe in lost people. So he got his cruiser and drove. The jail stood like a skeleton against the fog. Windows broken. Chain link fencing collapsed. The door was padlocked but not secure. Rust had eaten through the hinge, and when Danny pushed, it opened with a screech that echoed like a scream. He stepped inside. No power, no heat, just the cold breath of time and mildew. He called out, standard protocol. "This is Officer Laurie with the county police. If you're inside and in distress, call out." Nothing, just a slow creak from the second floor. That's when his body cam glitched for the first time. A flicker, just a second. Then it came back. But in that frozen moment, the timestamp looped. It blinked back to 1993. He didn't notice that part. Not yet. He climbed the stairs. Every step groaned beneath his boots. There were old holding cells up there, bars bent, and doors hanging. But it was quiet until the lights came on, only for a moment, flickering yellow like a dying flame. And then they died again. But when the light had flashed, he saw a shadow behind the bars. Too tall, too still. He aimed his flashlight, heart racing. No one there. He radioed in. Dispatch answered, but the voice was wrong. It was slower, like tape being dragged across a reel. And it said something that didn't make sense. Do not feed it. Then silence. He tried again. Static. Still, Danny pressed forward. At the end of the cell block, one door was shut. All the others were open and rusted off. But this one was sealed. Fresh padlock. Brand new. Which was impossible. Nobody had keys to this place. The county had condemned it. No one should have been here. And yet, there it was. Locked from the outside. Then the whisper started. Not in the hall. Not on the radio. Inside his ear. Let out. He turned around. No one there. But his flashlight began to flicker. And then he saw the carvings. On the walls of every cell. Don't open the door. Some carved in nail. Some scratched with bone. Every cell. Except one. The locked one. He stepped closer. Body cam footage shows him pause. Just for a second. He tilts his head like he's hearing something. He says, "Who's in there?" No reply. Then, a single knock from behind the door. It's a clean knock. Measured. Not frantic. Like whatever was inside knew he'd come. Danny radioed in again. This time, the voice said something else. And it wasn't the dispatcher. It was his own voice. Let out. He stepped back. But something kept him anchored. Like gravity was pulling him toward that cell. And the door started shaking. Slow at first. Then harder. The lock jangled. Then it stopped. His body cam flickered again. But now, the timestamp showed 1985. That's when he finally noticed. He backed away, went down the stairs, tried to leave, but the front door was gone, replaced by solid brick. And where the windows were, just walls. And behind him, footsteps. Soft ones, but not human. The body cam showed what looked like a long shadow, impossibly stretched, moving along the wall like a stain in reverse. Danny started calling out again. No answer. Then, something whispered right behind him. You're too late. It's already out. He turned. Nothing there. But now, the entire hallway was filled with fog. Thick, heavy like it was crawling. And in the center of it, barely visible, something crouched. Too pale. Limbs too long. Face covered in gauze. Not a ghost. Not a person. Something forgotten. His flashlight died. His cam glitched. And in the static, you can hear him whisper. It's copying me. The last footage from that night is a brief 5-second clip. It shows Danny, or something that looks like him, walking out through the front door. A door that should have been bricked over. But here's the catch. The department got the body cam footage the next morning. And according to the timestamps, it had been recorded 29 years ago. No one found Danny. Not really. But weeks later, a call came in from payphone. The voice was garbled. The line was static. But the dispatcher swears. It said, "Don't open the door again." And then, a click, and the sound of something breathing. Not human. Not close. But definitely on the line. It moved faster when you weren't looking at it. That's what Officer Caleb started telling people when he was still talking about it. Well, he could still talk at all. Whatever followed his cruiser that night didn't want to be seen, but it wanted to be followed. It all started with a simple welfare check. A quiet street, early hours of the morning. No lights on, no neighbors awake. Just Caleb, his flashlight, and a strange 911 call that didn't come from any known number. The dispatcher said it sounded like whispering. Words they couldn't quite make out. Almost like someone was repeating something backwards. Not frantic, not loud, but insistent. The address? 1419 Mill Grove Lane. But here's the thing. Mill Grove Lane didn't go that high. It stopped at 1415. Caleb chalked it up to a bad call. But protocol was protocol. He'd at least swing by the street and check. He passed 1415. Then 1417. No such thing on the record, but he slowed the cruiser anyway. And that's when the temperature dropped. Instantly, his breath fogged in front of him. Static buzzed on the radio. And across the dash cam, he saw it, a figure crawling on all fours, fast, darting across the road just beyond his headlights. But it didn't move like a person. Its limbs bent wrong. Not broken, but built for something else. Caleb froze. He radioed dispatch, but the static only got louder. He repeated himself. Then silence. Total radio blackout. The crawler had disappeared. He stepped out of the car. Nothing on the road. No footprints. No sound. Not even wind. But when he turned around to get back in, there were handprints on the hood. Long, wet smears like something had slid itself across the front of the cruiser without making a sound. Back in the car, he reviewed the dashcam footage. What he saw didn't make sense. The thing, whatever it was, only appeared for a frame or two at a time, like it was phasing in and out of reality. The more he scrubbed the footage, the more distorted the video became. And then, the screen went black. Just a flashing prompt. Follow ME. Caleb blinked. That wasn't part of the system. His cruiser's headlights suddenly shut off. In the dark, he saw movement at the edges of the trees. Low to the ground. Fast. Then came the scratching. Not outside the car, underneath it. He started the engine. No response. Then the dome light turned on by itself. And in the rearview mirror, it was sitting in the back seat. Not directly, just the outline. Its joints curled like a spider's. Head tilted completely backward, eyes wide open and glowing dimly. Not reflecting light, producing it. Caleb didn't look away. But the longer he stared, the closer it seemed to get, without moving. And then it was gone. When the cruiser finally turned back on, Caleb drove. Fast. No direction, just away. But the thing followed. It didn't run. It crawled. Sometimes on the road, sometimes along the side of buildings, sometimes on rooftops. But it kept pace. And he realized something. The less he looked in the mirrors, the closer it got. It fed on neglect, on being unseen. He passed intersections, red lights, entire neighborhoods. No other cars. No signs of life. And his GPS, blank. Not offline, not buffering. Just a white screen. Like he'd driven off the edge of the map. He finally pulled into the department lot. Bright floodlights overhead. Cameras on every pole. But none of them worked. He sprinted inside, leaving the car idling. But the building was wrong. It was his station. The same halls, the same lockers. But too quiet. The fluorescent lights buzzed, but nothing else. No phones ringing. No voices. No other officers. He checked the time. 4:19 a.m. Then again. 4:19. Again. Still 4:19. Tom had stopped. In the reflection of the vending machine glass, it was there again behind him. Closer now. Crawling up the wall like it was the floor. As if gravity bent around it. He turned. Nothing. Just the hallway. The vending machine dropped a can. He didn't touch anything. The label had one word on it. Look. He backed into the elevator, slammed the button. The doors closed, and the crawler's face was inches from a seam. Its expression didn't change. It didn't snarl or smile. It just stared, as if trying to learn his face. He hit every floor button. No response. The elevator didn't move. Then the lights cut out again. When they came back on, there were scratch marks on the walls. Inside the elevator. And the crawler wasn't outside anymore. It was in the corner of the ceiling. He never told anyone how he got out. He was found hours later in his cruiser, parked perfectly in front of his house. He didn't remember driving there. The engine was still warm, but the clock still read 4:19 a.m., and the radio played white noise on every channel. He was pale, shaking, and refused to be alone. For weeks, every reflective surface he passed, car windows, kitchen appliances, the glass in picture frames, he'd flinch, like he'd seen something crawling just out of frame. Then came the drawings, scribbled in notebooks, on receipts, on napkins. Always the same figure. Too many limbs. Too long. Bent in impossible ways. Sometimes with eyes. Sometimes without. But always crawling. Caleb eventually requested leave. Said he couldn't sleep. Said he didn't trust mirrors anymore. The cruiser he drove that night was decommissioned. Mechanics said it kept turning itself on in the middle of the night. The dashcam would activate at 4:19 a.m. sharp. Always the same message blinking on screen. Follow me. And sometimes, just for a moment, a shape moves behind the driver's seat. They've tried wiping the system. replacing the camera, even changing the vehicle ID. But the message still appears. And it's always at the same time, 4:19 a.m. Most emergency calls come from the living, but not all of them. In 2016, a veteran dispatcher in Oregon picked up line 2 and heard a voice that shouldn't have existed. There was no record of the call, no number, and no one alive to trace it back to. It began at 2:37 a.m., a lull hour when most of the town sleeps heavy and the night shift stares quietly at their coffee cups. The call center was nearly silent. Then a light blinked on line 2. The dispatcher, a woman named Erin with 10 years under her belt, picked up. 911. What's your emergency? There was a moment of silence. Then a girl's voice. Soft. Frantic. There's someone in the house. The call lasted 12 seconds. The girl whispered that she was hiding in a closet, that the man was downstairs, that she didn't know what he wanted. And then she gasped. Not screamed, just gasped. The line went dead. Erin tried to call back, but there was no callback number. The system didn't even register the incoming call. It was as if the line had never rung. But Erin knew what she heard, and she knew protocol. You never ignore a possible distress call. So she flagged the incident, sent the closest cruiser to the approximate cell tower area. That area had only one residential street nearby, Sycamore Lane. And that's where it gets strange. The responding officer, Collins, found the house right away. A 2-story craftsman that looked like it hadn't seen a porch light in years. There was no one outside, no lights inside. The front door was locked, but the side window, leading into the kitchen, was cracked open. He called it in, waited for backup. When his partner arrived, they entered together. Everything was cold. Still, no signs of struggle, no sign of anyone, until they reached the hallway closet. The door was ajar. Inside, they found a dusty pink shoe. Small, child size. Looked decades old. And next to it, an old flip phone. The battery was dead and covered in dust. Neither officer wanted to say it aloud, but both were thinking the same thing. That this call didn't just feel old. It was old. The next morning, the investigation widened. County records showed the house had been empty for nearly 12 years. No utilities, no activity, nothing. But that wasn't the worst part. When Erin asked for the 911 audio logs to pull the girl's voice, it wasn't there. Not just missing, non-existent. No entry for 2:37 a.m. Line 2 hadn't been active all night, but she'd heard it. She could repeat the girl's exact words. The way her voice shook on the word closet. That's when Erin did something she wasn't supposed to do. She looked through old dispatch reports from that neighborhood and found something buried under 2011. A girl, age 9, named KDR, murdered in her home by an intruder. She hid in a hallway closet. She tried to call 911, but the call never connected. Until 5 years later. Now here's the part where you wonder. What does it mean when a call arrives years after it was made? Some suggest it was an echo, a psychic imprint, a trauma so intense, it seared into the house itself and kept replaying, like a cassette tape stuck in rewind. Others think it was something worse, not a memory, but a plea, that maybe the girl's spirit never moved on, that she was still trying to escape that moment, still calling for help. But here's the most chilling theory, that the call wasn't for help at all. It was a warning, because 2 months later, a new family moved into the house. They lasted 4 nights. On the 5th night, they left. No forwarding address. No complaint filed. Just vanished. The real estate agent claimed they were spooked by the energy. But the neighbor, who briefly spoke to the father, remembers one strange comment. She wouldn't stop calling from the closet. Found his flashlight, still on, lying in the middle of the hallway. Batteries full. No signs of struggle. And the security cameras? They didn't record him leaving. They didn't record anything at all after 3:13 a.m. It was supposed to be a simple overnight shift. A temp guard named Marcus was brought in to patrol an old decommissioned courthouse while the city finalized plans to convert it into a records archive. It had no prisoners, no ongoing cases, and barely any power. But for whatever reason, they insisted someone be there overnight, just in case. Marcus wasn't new to this kind of job. Quiet buildings, long nights, flickering lights. He'd done them all. He even preferred gigs like this, less human interaction, more peace and quiet. But when he walked through the courthouse doors that first night, something felt off. It wasn't just the cold, though the building was bone-deep cold, even with space heaters scattered around. And it wasn't the silence either. It was that kind of silence that pressed against you, like it was waiting for you to speak first. Like the building itself was listening. The first few nights went by without incident. He noted the usual oddities: doors that wouldn't stay closed, lights that buzzed louder the longer you stood under them, and a stairwell that always smelled faintly like burnt paper. He made his rounds. He logged his check-ins. Nothing out of the ordinary. But on the fourth night, his routine started to unravel. At exactly 3:12 a.m., Marcus radioed in. A standard check-in. Calm. Measured. Nothing wrong. 1 minute later, the security system glitched. The live feed froze. The login terminal rebooted itself without prompt. For 8 minutes, no data was recorded. No video, no audio, no log entries. Then everything came back online. But Marcus was gone. The building was locked from the inside. No broken windows. No signs of forced entry. His patrol notes were still open on his tablet. A half-eaten energy bar sat on the desk. His jacket remained draped over the back of the chair. Only the flashlight, his backup one, was found, gently placed on the second-floor hallway. Still on. The official report chalked it up to a voluntary disappearance. Maybe Marcus got cold feet, they said. Maybe he just walked out and started a new life somewhere else. But there's a reason no one buys that explanation. Because Marcus wasn't the first. During the building's heyday, back when it still served as a working courthouse, rumors circulated about strange occurrences on the night shift. Custodians would complain about strange whispers near the archive rooms. One officer claimed he saw someone pacing the mezzanine walkway at 2 a.m., only to find that section locked from the inside with no one in sight. And in 1996, a clerk who stayed late to file transcripts disappeared. Her last call was to her husband, saying she thought someone was hiding behind the judge's bench. She was never found. There's a pattern in these vanishings. Most of them occur around the same window, between 3:10 and 3:15 a.m. That alone isn't chilling. What is chilling is what shows up in the background of some surviving footage from past years. On the handful of nights where the system didn't completely crash, faint audio can be heard during that time frame. Distorted whispering that doesn't match the voice of any personnel. The whispers don't form coherent words. But some technicians say, when you slow it down, you can make out fragmented phrases, "It's still here." Or, more unsettling, "You can't leave twice." That last phrase surfaced again in a maintenance report from 2003. A janitor filed a complaint that a door slammed shut on its own and trapped him for over an hour. While locked in the room, he swore someone was whispering that same line from the far corner of the dark storage space. "You can't leave twice." He quit the next day. So what was happening in that building? Some believe it has nothing to do with ghosts, or at least not in the traditional sense. There's a theory that the courthouse was built over a fault line of some kind. Not geological, but metaphysical. A place where time and memory blur. The original architect reportedly went missing 3 weeks before the final construction phase was complete. His blueprints were found smeared with notes written backward, like they were meant to be read in a mirror. One read, "Some walls are doors. Some rooms remember." Marcus may have stumbled into something the others didn't. Or maybe he followed a sound he thought was just a busted vent or a leaking pipe. Maybe he walked through one of those metaphorical doors without realizing it. When police swept the building, they discovered something strange. A section of the basement records room had collapsed inward. Not down, but inward, like something had pulled the walls towards center point. The floor tiles were warped in a perfect spiral. Nothing was under them, just more concrete. When asked if it could have been structural failure, the engineer who inspected it shook his head and said, "There's no architectural reason for that shape." No one was allowed back inside the courthouse after that. The renovation plans were canceled. The city deemed it unsafe for public repurposing. It sits boarded up to this day. Marcus' family never received any further explanation. Only a sealed report a final paycheck, and a request to return his badge. But there's one more detail that rarely gets mentioned. On the last body cam footage recovered from Marcus' shift, a file corrupted and mostly static, there's one clear frame. It lasts less than a second. In it, Marcus is standing in the hallway. Behind him, barely visible, is a silhouette. Not moving, not human, just standing there. Its outline isn't quite right, like a shadow trying to copy a shape it doesn't understand. People who've seen that frame report the same reaction, a wave of nausea, followed by a sense of being watched, even hours later. Maybe Marcus didn't vanish. Maybe he's still there, in a way. And maybe, just maybe, some walls really are doors. They heard the footsteps before they found the blood. But no officer was accounted for, and no prints matched the boots they all wore. Worse, those prints walked straight through locked doors. This happened in 2019 in a small rural precinct just outside Helena, Montana. It was the kind of place where calls rarely escalated past bar fights or bear sightings. But one night, the station itself became the crime scene. Officer Mark Holloway was working the night shift, partnered with rookie Dana Kessler. It was a cold January night, quiet, uneventful. Around 2:14 a.m., the building's central corridor picked up a single line of footsteps on the audio logs. Crisp, slow, deliberate. Mark didn't notice it at first, but Dana did. They were sitting in dispatch, going over old paperwork when Dana tilted her head. "Did you hear that?" Mark paused, then heard it too. Footsteps, one after another. But they didn't come from outside or even the main entrance. These sounded internal, close, too close. They checked the security monitors. Nothing. The front door hadn't opened. No sensor stripped. But the sound of footsteps continued, pacing the upper hallway above them. They assumed someone stayed late, possibly Sergeant Kemper, who was known to forget things and double back. But when Dana called up, there was no answer. Mark took the elevator to the second floor. Dana remained downstairs, eyes on the monitors. When Mark reached the second floor, he paused. The hallway was empty, but colder than it should have been. All the lights were on, but everything felt dim, like the shadows were thicker around the corners. He stepped out and heard the footsteps again, behind him. But when he turned around, the hallway was still empty. Dana's voice came over the radio, nervous now. "You're not alone up there." She could hear it too, clear as day, through the station mics. "Mark, there's something walking right behind you." He spun around again, nothing. But then, from the far end of the corridor, one of the office doors slowly creaked open. It was Records. Nobody had gone in there all day. He called out, "Hello, Kemper." Silence. He drew his flashlight, even though the lights were on. The beam flickered slightly as he stepped into the records room. What he saw didn't make sense. All the files on the back shelves were lying open, dozens of them. They were all case files. Cold cases. Dana's voice came through again. "Mark, there's footsteps in the hallway. I can hear them, but I can't see anything on the feed." Mark slowly backed out of the room. His skin was crawling. Then the footsteps started again, coming closer. He moved quickly toward the elevator. But just as the doors opened, the footsteps stopped. No one was there. But on the floor were muddy boot prints. Wet, fresh, and heavy. They led straight up to where he stood, and then vanished. When Mark got back to Dana, her face was pale. She showed him the footage. The hallway camera hadn't glitched. It had recorded something. Not a person, no figure, no body. Just a motion detection showing red flashes, as if something invisible was walking. They brought in another officer, Sullivan, to review the logs. Here's where it gets stranger. The boot prints they found upstairs didn't match any department-issued footwear. Not even close. The sole pattern was inconsistent, like something handmade or older. And there were only right-footed prints. No left. And even more disturbing, where the steps ended, there was a thin streak of dark residue on the floor like something had dragged. They cleaned it. But the next night, it happened again. Same time. 2:14 nachts. Only this time, it wasn't just footsteps. The radio in dispatch buzzed to life with garbled static. Mixed within the static was a whisper. One word, repeated. "File, file, file." Dana tracked it down. The voice came from the records room mic again, and when they opened it, more files were disturbed. Each one, a case involving a missing person, and all from before the year 1990. They pulled those cases. Every single one had a strange element. Witnesses described hearing footsteps when no one was around. Doors open on their own. One case even mentioned a woman who said she saw a man with no face standing outside her house. But there were no prints, no evidence. Just that one statement and the sound of someone pacing upstairs. It gets worse. Mark found one file that hit too close. A missing persons report filed in 1988. The missing man's name? Holloway. Same last name. The man was 28 years old, a former police recruit who had disappeared during his first solo patrol. The file noted something chilling. He'd radioed in right before vanishing, saying he heard footsteps coming from the ceiling above him. Mark asked his father about it. His father went quiet, then admitted something. That was your uncle. He'd never been told. The family buried the story. His uncle had disappeared during a routine check at an old municipal building, the same one that stood on the grounds before the current station was built. So they dug deeper. That station? Built in 1996. Before that, the land held a smaller, run-down police substation. It had burned down in '95 under strange circumstances. No cause was ever officially listed. But rumors spread that it was haunted, that officers stationed there often requested transfers. Some claimed to see people walking past the windows late at night, when the station was locked up. The final twist came when Dana reviewed bodycam audio from the current station, archived recordings stored on a backup server. One clip was corrupted, just static, but buried deep in the file, she heard it again. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, getting closer, followed by a low whisper. Still here. The IT team was called in to audit the system. No explanation. No breach. No evidence of tampering. The department doesn't talk about it publicly. But patrols were changed. No officer works in the station past 2 a.m. Cameras are still active, but many of them are permanently set to maintenance mode at night. And sometimes, when you listen closely during the logs, you still hear footsteps. Walking a corridor no one's in. It was a routine wellness check. No weapons, no suspects. Just a call from a worried neighbor about an elderly woman who hadn't answered her door in 3 days. But what the responding officer recorded on his body cam, the department still won't talk about it. And the footage? It never made it into evidence. Let's rewind to a cold morning in November. Officer Grant Myers, 29 years old, 3 years on the force, was dispatched to a small, ivy-choked home just outside the city limits. A simple welfare call, the kind no officer likes because it's usually a dead body or worse, someone alive and waiting in a strange, silent kind of madness. The neighbor who called it and mentioned the woman who lived there, Mrs. Evelyn Granger, was in her late 80s. Quiet, kept to herself, but her porch light had been on for 3 nights straight. Mail piling up, and most unsettling, her bedroom window, which was usually locked tight, had been wide open since Monday. Officer Myers pulled up just after 10 a.m. His body cam clicked on as he stepped out of the cruiser. The footage begins with birdsong, wind, the normalcy of a cold, gray suburban day. He knocks. No answer. He knocks again, louder, and then the screen stutters. Not a glitch, more like a pulse. The entire recording shudders for half a second, like someone tugged on the lens from inside the house. But the feed keeps rolling. He radios in. No response. Gonna check around back. What's odd, and this is from the little bit of footage leaked to Internal Affairs, is that at this point, Officer Myers starts whispering. He's alone. There's no threat. But his voice drops low, cautious, like he's trying not to wake something up. This place, something's off. Those are his words. Not to dispatch. Just to himself. The backyard is small. Overgrown. The back door's wide open. No sign of forced entry. He steps inside. This is where things take a turn. From here, the audio goes strange. There's this faint sound in the background. Not quite humming. Not quite a voice. Something between the two. Layers of sound, rising and falling in patterns that almost resemble speech, like someone murmuring just beyond understanding. But no one else is inside the house. Or so they say. Officer Myers moves through the kitchen slowly. His flashlight catches dust motes dancing in the still air. Plates are still on the table. Uneaten food, now growing mold. And then something happens. Not in the house. In the video, frame by frame, the walls of the kitchen stretch. It's subtle at first, almost unnoticeable unless you pause the video and look closely. But over time, the corners of the room begin to elongate. Not physically, only in the footage. Like the space is being warped on film. It's not CGI. It's not a lens issue. Forensics ran the clip through every analysis program they had. There's no tampering, no bleach. It's as if the camera is seeing something the eye can't. Then the feed cuts out for 3.7 seconds. When it returns, Officer Myers is upstairs. No explanation, no footsteps, just a hard cut. His voice is shaking. Bedroom, door was open. But now it's closed. Again, we never see him open it. The camera lurches forward suddenly, one fast jolt, like the officer stumbled or was pulled. And then we hear it. A whisper. Just one word. But it's unmistakably his second voice. It says stay. Not shouted. Not urgent. It's almost comforting. Lulling. Officer Myers opens the door. The bedroom is pristine. Too pristine. Bed made, blinds open, sunlight pooling perfectly across the carpet. No sign of anyone inside. Until you freeze frame the footage at the 11:42 mark. Just for a fraction of a second, in the mirror above the dresser, you can see something. A figure. But it's not Mrs. Granger. It's not even human. Thin, pale, bent, standing behind him. When the body cam swings around, there's nothing there. Empty hallway. Quiet. He backs out. Slowly. His breathing erratic now. He keeps checking behind him. Something's clearly wrong, but he hasn't seen it. Only the camera has. Downstairs, the atmosphere seems denser. That's the only way witnesses described it after watching the raw footage. Like the house was breathing. You can hear the floorboards groaning, but not under his weight. It sounds like they're groaning in anticipation. Officer Myers stops in the living room. Looks around. Says, she's gone. No one's here. But then again, the audio picks something up. A tapping. 3 taps. Then silence. Then 3 more. Morse code, maybe? The pattern repeats. Until it speeds up. Faster and faster. Until it becomes a violent knocking from inside the walls. And that's when Officer Myers bolts. The camera flails as he runs, and you can hear him muttering, over and over, one phrase. It saw me. It saw me. It saw me. When he reaches the front door, something stops him. The door won't open. Not locked. Not jammed. Just won't open. He tries the windows. They're nailed shut. Then the camera flickers again. Hard. When it comes back, we see Officer Myers standing in the living room. Perfectly still. No movement. No sound. Just staring. His breathing has stopped. His eyes are wide. His lips moving, but no words coming out. Then one word escapes. Help. But the way he says it, like it's not meant for the camera. Not for dispatch. Almost like for whoever's watching. The video ends there. That was the last anyone saw of him for nearly 3 hours. When backup finally arrived, the house was empty. Myers was found sitting in his cruiser, engine off, staring straight ahead. Unresponsive, hands gripping the wheel so tightly they had to break his fingers to get them loose. He wouldn't speak, not for a week. When he finally did, he only said this. The house isn't haunted. It's hungry. The footage was immediately sealed by the department. Official report lists it as a technical malfunction and emotional distress due to environmental factors. But several officers who reviewed the footage before it was locked down resigned that same month. Others refused to speak about it at all. One officer, who leaked the partial clip to an anonymous paranormal investigator, claimed the original recording was over 9 hours long. But the body cam only had a 2-hour battery. He said there were parts of the house no one had ever seen before. Hallways that led to nowhere. Rooms that shouldn't exist. And something with no eyes that walked on the ceiling. Why would the department seal something like that? Why erase evidence? Unless they're afraid of what might still be in that footage. Or worse, what might be watching from it. traced the 911 call to a woman who had been buried 3 days earlier. And when they played back the recording, her voice was unmistakable. She sounded calm, not panicked, just wrong. The dispatcher who took the call later said it felt like the line was colder than usual, like something was draining the warmth from the headset. She didn't hear static. She heard breathing, rhythmic, measured, like someone who wasn't supposed to be breathing at all. The caller identified herself clearly, gave a full name, address, even her birth date. The dispatcher blinked when the screen lit up with her file. There was a red tag next to it. Deceased. Confirmed. Pronounced dead 3 days ago in a car accident outside of town. But the voice kept talking, asking for help. No screaming. No begging. Just that unsettling calmness. What made it worse? She asked for someone by name. Officer Caleb Mercer. The department tried to pass it off as a prank. A sick joke using voice mimicry or AI. But the problem was the call wasn't routed through a traditional network. It didn't ping off any cell towers. It came from a landline, one that had been disconnected for over a year. That landline belonged to her childhood home, and that home had been empty since her mother passed. No electricity, no heating, just dust and locked doors. Officer Mercer wasn't even on duty that night, but when he heard about the call, something in his stomach turned over. Because 3 days ago, before she died, he'd found a voicemail from her on his personal phone, one he hadn't shared with anyone. In it, she said she felt like someone was following her. That every time she looked in the rearview mirror, she saw a man standing in the middle of the road, no matter where she was driving. She didn't say his face was blurry. She said it was empty, a face that was trying to remember how to look human. She said she felt like she was being hunted, not by a person, but by something that knew her name. Mercer deleted the message out of guilt. They dated years ago. Things ended badly. But when her car was found wrapped around a tree with no signs of breaking, he couldn't shake the idea that she'd seen him again. That thing, with the empty face. And now she was calling him from the grave. The police tech team examined the call metadata, but it didn't make sense. There were no timestamps, no duration, just a single entry, line open. It had stayed open for 6 hours. No one had answered beyond the initial response. But when they listened to the entire recording, the voice never wavered. She kept speaking, like she was in a loop, like she was trying to remember what it felt like to be alive. "Caleb," she said, almost whispering, "I'm still here. I'm not where they put me." That was the moment they pulled the plug on the investigation. Unofficially, officers started avoiding calls near her old neighborhood. A few weeks later, someone spray-painted "She's Not Alone" on the side of her house. It stayed there for months. No one ever painted over it. But the strangest part came when Mercer visited the house himself. He didn't report it to the department, just went alone, parked outside and sat in silence. The front door was locked, exactly as expected, but the phone inside was ringing. An old rotary landline, unplugged from the wall. He said later that it wasn't the sound that got to him. It was the fact that the rotary dial slowly turned on its own, over and over, dialing the same number. His. No one knows what Mercer heard when he picked it up. He left the force shortly after. Moved states. Changed numbers. Doesn't talk to anyone from the department. But one officer swears he still gets voicemails. Never longer than 10 seconds. Always in silence. Except for a faint whisper at the very end. "Not where they put me." So what do we make of this? Was it a glitch in the system? A bizarre prank that went too far? Or something older? Something tied to that idea that death isn't always a door, but a hallway. And sometimes people get stuck in the middle. There are urban legends about phone calls from the dead. Phantom rings, where the caller ID flashes the name of someone long gone. But this case had everything. Confirmation of death, call records, even voice recognition analysis. The woman who called 911 wasn't just contacting the police. She was contacting someone she trusted. And maybe that's the worst part, because it means she still remembered him, still needed him, still believed he could help her. But the real horror is this. What if she wasn't looking for help? What if she was calling to warn him, to tell him that the thing with the empty face hadn't stopped, that it had found her, and now it was looking for the next person in line? And if that's true, then Officer Caleb Mercer might not be the last one to pick up a call that was never supposed to come through. And the next time you hear a phone ring with no signal, no caller ID. You might want to think twice before you answer, because the dead don't always rest. Sometimes they remember your number. Don't talk about what happened on Route 7. Ask any officer from the Ridge County Sheriff's Department about that patrol shift, and you'll see it in their eyes before they say anything. The hesitation, the flicker of fear, the quiet denial. But one thing is always consistent. Nobody takes the Route 7 night shift twice, because the last ones who did weren't the same after. It started subtly, back in late October, during one of those long, windless nights when the trees don't sway and the dark feels heavier than usual. Officer Paul Myers was doing routine patrol along Route 7, a winding, largely unlit stretch that skirts the edge of the Dunlow Forest, a patch of woods with a history older than the county itself. Paul's dashcam caught everything. At first, nothing unusual, just the quiet hum of the cruiser and occasional radio check-ins. But just past mile marker 13, the footage shows static. Not full-on glitching, just a slow, creeping distortion, like the lens was struggling to stay focused. Paul didn't report anything strange at that time. He just kept driving, until the call came in. 9:23 p.m. A woman's voice, shaky, whispering, called 911. Her message was short. He's outside. He's not. He's not wearing a face. The call was traced. Not to a house. Not to a landline. But to a dead zone, deep in the forest bordering Route 7. No known structures. No signal towers. No reason there should have been any service at all. Still, the ping was there, glowing red on the dispatcher's map. Paul took the call. 10 minutes after entering the tree line, he radioed in. His voice was calm, almost too calm. He said he found nothing, but he wasn't turning back. I just want to walk a little further, he told dispatch. There's something humming. They never heard from him again. When backup arrived 40 minutes later, Paul's cruiser was idling on the shoulder. The headlights were on. The driver's door was open, and the forest was dead silent. Not even insects. The cam footage ends with Paul stepping into the trees. A figure can barely be made out in the background, tall, thin, wrong, like something mid-movement that had forgotten how to finish its shape. Its presence is only visible for 3 frames. Then static. The department called it an accident. Lost in the woods, they said. But no search dogs picked up his trail, and none of the thermal drones could detect a heat signature. It was like the forest swallowed him whole. And then it happened again. 2 months later, a rookie named Jenna Ramirez was paired with a senior officer, Tony Ellison. They were assigned Route 7 against Jenna's protests. She heard about Paul. Everyone had. But the department was short-staffed. She didn't have a choice. Tony tried to keep the mood light. Said stories like Paul's were just cop campfire tales, meant to haze new recruits. But once they hit mile marker 13, Tony changed. Jenna reported it later. How his posture stiffened. How he stopped responding to her. Just stared straight ahead at the road like he was listening to something she couldn't hear. She said she reached over to shake him. That's when he whispered it. There's someone running alongside the car. Don't look. Jenna didn't believe him until she did. Because even though they were doing 50 down that stretch, she heard the footsteps too, and they were keeping pace. Jenna made the mistake of turning her head. What she saw was wrong. She won't describe it. Not clearly, but she said its mouth wasn't open, yet she could hear it screaming. Not outside the car. In her head. Directly. The cruiser jerked. They swerved off the road. When she came to, Tony was gone. Driver's door wide open. Footprints leading into the forest, and then vanishing mid-stride, like he was lifted out of existence. Jenna doesn't patrol anymore. She transferred out, moved states, changed her number, and when asked why she left, she only ever gives the same answer. Because sometimes the radio isn't picking up static. It's picking up something else. Since then, Route 7 has unofficially been blacklisted. Officers fake engine issues, trade shifts, or outright call in sick to avoid it. Even the ones who claimed they're not scared avoid that road. But it's what's been happening since those disappearances that's worse. One evening, a civilian commuter called the sheriff's department. Said she was driving past mile marker 13 when she saw a cruiser parked just beyond the trees. Headlights off. No movement. She assumed it was a speed trap. until the same cruiser appeared again a few miles up the road. Same markings, same license plate, same cracked tail light. She was sure of it. That wouldn't be so strange, except Route 7 is a straight road. No turn-offs, no shortcuts, no way a car could have leapfrogged her. She checked her dash cam later. It didn't show the second cruiser, but it did show something else. A silhouette in her back seat. One that vanished when she blinked. She hasn't driven that road since. There's a theory among the veterans, a quiet one, not officially spoken, but always present in low conversations between those who've been here long enough to know when to shut up. They say Route 7 isn't haunted. Not exactly. They say it remembers. The theory goes that every officer who vanishes out there becomes part of it. Not as ghosts, not even as people anymore, but as reflections, echoes, traces of a mind still walking a beat long after the body's gone. They say you can hear them on the radio sometimes, if you tune just past the official channels. If you catch that soft distortion at the edge of reception, whispers that say names no longer on the force roster. Names like Paul Myers, names like Tony Ellison. Some say they're trapped. Others say they're warning us. One officer, who insists he'll never drive Route 7 again, told a story about a call that came through last winter. A late-night 911 from a cruiser logged as out of service. The voice on the other end whispered just once. Tell the new guy not to stop this time. He checked the recording. The cruiser ID? It matched Paul's old car. They'd decommissioned it 4 years ago. Burned it. And yet, somehow it still shows up. Same cracked tail light. Same headlights flickering at the tree line. Waiting. Watching. Reminding everyone that some roads aren't just roads. They're boundaries. And some shifts should never be taken. Some 911 calls are never meant to be answered. And some were never truly heard. At precisely 2:13 a.m. on a frostbitten Tuesday in January, Officer Daniel Kraus responded to what seemed like a routine distress call. A woman screaming from inside a residence on the outskirts of a quiet Midwestern town. It wasn't the call itself that unnerved dispatch. It was the silence that came after. The screaming had been piercing, panicked, raw, but just for 8 seconds. Then complete stillness. When the dispatcher called back, the line was dead. But what's strange is that when they pulled the recording later that day to submit with the report, the audio was empty. The call log existed. The timestamp matched, but the sound file held nothing, not even background static. They said it was a glitch, a data corruption, but Daniel didn't buy that, because when he arrived at the address, he swore he heard the screaming with his own ears. The house at 48 Hollow Pine Road was an old colonial-style structure left mostly untouched since the late 70s. Paint peeling, porch rotting, front gate twisted off one hinge. It had been empty for years, except for the recent reports from neighbors about movement in the upstairs windows and that same female scream, heard at odd hours of the night. Daniel knocked. No answer. He circled the perimeter. No signs of forced entry. But the front door was unlocked. The house had that kind of silence that doesn't feel like quiet, more like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Dust lingered in the air like it hadn't been disturbed in years. Yet the kitchen sink was dripping, and faint boot prints, his size, already marked the floor ahead of him. But he hadn't been in that room yet. He clicked on his body cam, noting the strange stillness for the report. Possible squatter, he muttered aloud, trying to make sense of what felt deeply wrong. As he stepped into the living room, a mirror hanging on the far wall flickered. Not cracked, not shifting, but flickered. For just a moment, his own reflection had vanished. Then the scream came again, this time upstairs. Same pitch, same terror, same 8 seconds. He drew his weapon and rushed toward the staircase, boots pounding, breath short. But when he reached the hallway above, there was nothing. Only 4 doors, all shut. The screaming had stopped the moment he'd reached the top step, as if it had lured him just far enough. He checked each room methodically. Empty bedrooms layered in dust, furniture shrouded in grimy sheets. Nothing alive. But in the final room, what looked like a study, something caught his eye. There was a recorder sitting on the desk, and it was already playing. The reel spun, but no sound came out. As he approached it, Daniel's radio crackled violently, then cut out. For a split second, he swore he heard his own voice whispering back to him through the static. Something he hadn't said. Something like, "Don't listen to it again." He backed away, unnerved. That's when the door behind him slammed shut, hard enough to rattle the floorboards. He spun around, yanked it open, but the hallway was pitch black. His flashlight flickered, then died completely. And then, the screaming started again. Only this time, it was right behind him. 8 seconds of pure panic. And when he turned around, nothing. Just the recorder, still spinning. Daniel bolted from the house. Radio dispatch. They sent backup. But when the second officer arrived, the house was exactly as Daniel had first found it. No sound. No screams. No recorder on the desk. The body cam footage showed everything. Him entering the house, walking the halls, speaking aloud. But when he played the footage back later that night, there was no audio. Not silence, nothing. Like it had been erased entirely. Even the parts where Daniel was clearly speaking aloud were muted. He reported the malfunction. Tech support ran diagnostics. The file was intact, video uncorrupted, timestamp valid. But here's where it gets stranger. The backup officer swore Daniel never said a word when they regrouped outside. But Daniel distinctly remembered telling him the scream was upstairs. He remembered the officer responding with, "I didn't hear anything." Yet in the official transcript, no such conversation was recorded. The officer wrote. Kraus stood silent, looked shaken, couldn't speak. Daniel began to doubt his memory. But then he found something else. Later that week, while digging into records about the property, he discovered that 48 Hollow Pine had once belonged to a reclusive woman named Elise Camden. She went missing in 1983. Her last known interaction? A panicked 911 call where she was reportedly heard screaming for help. That call lasted exactly 8 seconds. And the audio was also missing from the official archive. 2 calls, 42 years apart. Same scream, same silence. Daniel's fixation grew. He requested access to historical records, local folklore, and archive police files. He discovered a chilling pattern. Once every 13 years, a call from that house is made. Always between 2 and 3 a.m. Always a woman's scream. Always 8 seconds. And always the audio disappears. He traced back the house's ownership through nearly a century. 3 other disappearances, all under similar circumstances. One officer, assigned to investigate in 1970, resigned days later and checked himself into a psychiatric hospital. His final written statement read, "She's still screaming, but only I can hear it." Daniel tried to forget. He left the case alone, transferred precincts. But sometimes, while driving alone at night, his dash cam will flicker. His radio will cut. And once, during a night patrol, the dash cam caught him turning suddenly, muttering, "Did you hear that?" But the footage? Silent. 8 seconds of video. No sound. Some believe the house is a beacon, that it traps trauma the way a mirror traps reflections. Others say it's a place where time folds in on itself, repeating its darkest moments for those who dare listen. But Daniel knows one thing for certain. The scream is real. He heard it, more than once. But the recordings will never prove it, because the screaming never shows up on the audio. They found his flashlight still on, half buried in snow, beam pointed straight into the trees, as if it had been dropped mid-step. His cruiser's engine was still running, radio crackling softly. No struggle, no blood, just silence. And the chilling fact, the last person he found had been missing for 10 years. Deputy Carl Murrin wasn't new to strange calls. Policing in remote parts of northern Montana came with its share of weirdness. Animals behaving wrong, voices on empty roads, even phantom hitchhikers. But what happened on December 3rd, 2019 wasn't just strange. It was impossible. At 10:16 p.m., a 911 call came in from a woman claiming to be Claire Henley, a name that sent a wave of confusion through dispatch. Claire had vanished a decade ago. At 17, she left school, walked home on a quiet Friday night, and never arrived. Her case went cold. No leads, no body, no suspects. But now, her voice, soft, disoriented, was on the line, asking for help from a payphone in Briar Hollow, a stretch of highway so empty most locals don't even use it anymore. Carl was the closest unit. He acknowledged the call and headed out. Dashcam footage shows nothing out of the ordinary. Snow falling gently, empty road, radio chatter. At 10:49 p.m., he arrived at the intersection near Briar Hollow. And that's where the mystery begins. There is camera footage of Carl stepping out of the cruiser, flashlight in hand, scanning the area. A tall figure, female, appears briefly at the edge of the frame. Pale, wearing a jacket described in Claire's original missing persons report. But when Carl calls out, she doesn't respond. She just turns and walks into the tree lane. Carl follows. It's important to note, Carl was mic'd. The audio from his chest unit was recording everything. At first, there's just the crunch of boots on snow. Then his voice. I see you. Miss, please stop. Silence. Then more footsteps. Claire. The audio crackles, then cuts to dead air. From that moment on, Carl Murrin was never seen again. The search for Carl launched within hours. Dogs, helicopters, state troopers. They combed Briar Hollow and the surrounding forest for days. Nothing. Not a single trace. No signs of struggle. No broken branches. No blood. Except for one thing. About 60 feet from the tree line, buried beneath a thin sheet of ice, search teams found something that shouldn't have existed. A flip phone. Burnt orange. Early 2000s model. And inside, still powered, Claire Henley's voicemail greeting, confirmed by her parents. It was her phone, the one she had with her when she vanished in 2009. The voicemail was simple. Hi, this is Claire. Leave a message. I'll get back to you. Normal. Calm. Except the timestamp on the phone showed it had last received a call 6 minutes before Carl arrived. From Carl Murrin's own personal number. Investigators brushed it off as a glitch. But digital forensics confirmed it. The call log showed an outbound call from Carl to Claire Henley's deactivated number. Yet Carl's phone showed no record of dialing it. This is where the case veers from unexplained into the truly bizarre. When investigators reviewed the dashcam footage frame by frame, something changed. On second viewing, the female figure at the edge of the forest? Gone. In her place, a shadowed gap between the trees. No movement. No sign of anyone. Yet Carl still walks toward it. Even more disturbing, when the footage was sent to an external forensic lab for enhancement, analysts reported something eerie. In 2 frames, just before Carl disappears, his flashlight beam illuminates what looks like a face, pale, open mouth, and identical to Claire Henley. But in the very next frame, it's gone. You'd think this would be chalked up to digital noise, lens flare, except for one fact. The same image, Claire's face, same angle, was found reflected in Carl's passenger side window at the moment he exits the vehicle. A face that shouldn't be there. A face that wasn't there on the original footage. By January, the case was effectively frozen. Official word. Deputy Murrin was lost in the line of duty, presumed to have succumbed to the elements. But unofficially, officers began refusing Briar Hollow assignments. Dispatch logs show that area remained untouched for over a year. Until July 2021, a new recruit, Deputy Lane Ramirez, was passing through Briar Hollow on his way to a nearby call. It was daylight, 2:11 p.m. No snow, no fog, nothing strange, until his radio sparked to life. A soft voice. Female. Is someone there? Please. Lane slowed his car. The voice was faint, fuzzy, like it was buried under static. Then clearer. It's Claire. Please, I'm so cold. Then silence. Lane, confused, checked in with dispatch. No calls had come through. No alerts. Just a clean line. They replayed the tape. There was no recording of Claire's voice. But Lane insisted. And when they pulled body cam footage from the incident, nothing. No audio at all for those 32 seconds. Just Lane staring blankly into the woods. Not blinking. Not moving. Later, Lane would report something he didn't tell his supervisor. He said he saw a figure standing among the trees, wearing a deputy's uniform and holding a flashlight. One-way mirrors are designed to protect the observer. But what happens when something on the other side is watching you? In 2015, a small-town police department in Minnesota quietly sealed off its old interrogation wing. No press releases, no official explanation, just a quiet memo, internal only, that circulated among officers. It read, "Room 3 is no longer to be used. Avoid entering after dark. Mirrors are to be covered." This is the story of what happened in that room, and why the mirror should have never been installed in the first place. Officer Darren Kellerman wasn't new to night duty. He'd worked with the department for 9 years. By the book, level-headed. But something shifted the night he volunteered for an overnight evidence audit, alone. At exactly 2:43 a.m., security footage shows him exiting the evidence room and walking toward the sealed interrogation wing. He wasn't authorized to be there. He didn't have clearance. And yet, he walked calmly, even deliberately, like he needed to check something. Room 3 had been inactive for months. Supposedly, the lighting was faulty and a minor flood had rendered it off-limits. But when Kellerman stepped inside, everything turned on, fluorescence humming to life. Camera angle clear. Mirror spotless. He stood facing the one-way mirror for 14 minutes. Not pacing, not moving, just staring. Then something truly strange happened. He smiled, a slow, unnatural curl of the lips. Not like he was amused, more like someone who finally understood something terrifying and accepted it. At 3:04 a.m., the footage glitches. Just a blink. Less than a second. When the image returns, Kellerman is no longer in the room. They found his flashlight still on. His radio was left untouched on the floor. But there was no sign of forced exit. No other doors. Just the mirror. That was the last time anyone saw him. Let's rewind. Room 3 hadn't always been strange. In fact, it was considered the cleanest of the department's interview rooms. Good acoustics, strong lighting, neutral space. But officers started noticing things. Subtle things. Suspects would refuse to look toward the mirror. Some became nauseous after only minutes inside. Others asked who else was in the room with them, even when they were alone. One officer, reviewing an interrogation tape, swore she heard whispering not recorded during the session. When she enhanced the audio, a second voice emerged, not belonging to the suspect nor the officer. Just 4 words, spoken clearly. "I see you two." The voice never repeated. It couldn't be isolated. Audio techs chalked it up to feedback. But officers began requesting to use other rooms. They didn't want to be near room 3, not even to observe. One detective, off the record, claimed he once saw something in the mirror that wasn't there in the room, a handprint pressed against the inside of the glass. But when they checked the suspect footage from the other side, the glass was clean. Now here's where things get stranger. The mirror in room 3 wasn't part of the original design. It was installed in 1998, donated secondhand from a neighboring department that had recently upgraded their facilities. The source department burned down less than a year later. Cause of fire, undetermined. But reports noted that fire alarms failed to go off in one section of the building, the interrogation wing. That wing had mirrors installed throughout. Could it be the mirror itself, the physical object, is somehow tainted? It's an idea dismissed by logic, but not by folklore. Across multiple cultures, mirrors are seen as more than reflective surfaces. They're considered gateways, or worse, observers. In some beliefs, covering a mirror after death prevents the soul from becoming trapped. In others, mirrors are used in rituals to summon something not quite human, something that remembers being looked at. Back to Kellerman. When the department reviewed the footage from outside room 3, they noticed something eerie. As he approached the door, he seemed to be responding to something, nodding subtly, even mouthing words. But there was no one else in the hallway. They slowed the footage to a frame-by-frame analysis. And that's when they saw it. 4:2 frames, less than a tenth of a second. His reflection blinked out before he did. Not a video glitch. The surrounding light remained. His shadow still moved. But his reflection vanished, and in its place, a tall, dark shape, vaguely humanoid, staring out from behind the glass. It didn't move. It didn't mimic. It just stared. Those frames have never been released to the public. One analyst quit the day after reviewing them, citing nightmares. He claimed the shape in the mirror knew his name. The department has since boarded up room 3. The mirror is still there, reportedly sealed behind a concrete slab. Kellerman's case remains open, filed under unexplained disappearance. But here's something most don't know. 2 years after the incident, during a renovation of the HVAC system, contractors accidentally cut into the wall adjacent to room 3. They discovered something behind the mirror cavity, something that shouldn't have been there. A second room, not listed on any blueprints. No ventilation, no door, just a 6x6 concrete enclosure with scratch marks on all 4 walls. And in the center of that floor, a chair, bolted, facing the back of the mirror. No one can explain how it was built or why it was hidden. But analysis showed the chair was decades old, dating back before the police building itself was constructed. And it had iron restraints, well worn, as if used often. But here's the part that still makes the hairs on investigators' necks rise. There are claw marks on the inside of the mirror glass, only visible from that hidden room, as if something or someone had been watching all along, waiting. What if mirrors don't just reflect us, but remember us? What if, every time we look into one, something looks back and waits to be acknowledged? Maybe room 3 was never cursed. Maybe it was never haunted. Maybe it was simply seen, and once something on the other side knows it's being watched, it doesn't forget. Ever.